the sixth Mughal emperor. A life full of surprises. Imagine a throne, a really fancy one that represents power, wealth and control over a huge and amazing empire. This throne belonged to Aurangzeb, the sixth Mughal emperor, who ruled for almost 50 years, from 1658 to 1707. His time as emperor was a mix of big changes and growing unrest. Aurangzeb was a very religious Muslim in an empire with many different religions, and people still argue about him today. Some people admire him, while others criticize him. Aurangzeb was born in 1618. He was a smart guy who loved to learn, a great military leader and a very religious person. His life was full of contradictions. He lived a simple life and followed Islamic law very closely, but he was also a tough conqueror who made the Mughal Empire bigger than ever before. He supported art and science, but he also made non-Muslims pay extra taxes and destroyed Hindu temples, which still makes people angry today. Aurangzeb's story isn't a simple story of good guys and bad guys. It's a story about ambition and faith, about being good at politics and being very religious, all happening in a big empire that was changing all the time. To understand Aurangzeb, we need to learn about his time period, the things that influenced his decisions and the lasting impact he had on history. Conquering the South. Aurangzeb's military adventures. The Deccan, a large area in southern India, was where Aurangzeb showed how strong and ambitious he was as a military leader. The Deccan was full of kingdoms fighting each other, changing alliances and resisting the Mughal rule. Aurangzeb, who had been a soldier since he was young, saw the Deccan as both a difficult challenge and a great opportunity. His armies went south and fought against the sultanates of Bijapur and Golconda in long sieges and bloody battles. The Deccan campaign showed how smart Aurangzeb was as a military leader, but they also showed how ruthless he could be. The siege of Golconda, which lasted for 8 months, proved how determined he was to crush any opposition, even if it meant a lot of suffering for the people trapped inside. But winning in the Deccan came with a price. Years of fighting cost a lot of money and weakened the Mughal army. Also, conquering the Deccan made the local people resent the Mughals because they saw them as invaders. So while Aurangzeb's campaigns in the south made the empire bigger, they also created problems for the future. Religion and the empire. Aurangzeb's controversial rules. When Aurangzeb was emperor, things changed a lot for religion in the Mughal Empire. He was a very devout Muslim and wanted the government to follow Islamic law more closely. He made new rules that affected his subjects who were not Muslim. For example, he brought back the jizya, a tax that non-Muslims had to pay. This made a lot of people upset and was seen as a step back from the religious tolerance of earlier Mughal emperors. Aurangzeb also ordered the destruction of Hindu temples because he believed they were places of idol worship. This action, more than any other, made many people see him as intolerant towards other religions. But it's important to remember that Aurangzeb's religious policies were complicated and often influenced by politics as well as his own beliefs. He gave Muslims important jobs in the government, but he also kept many Hindus in important positions. He supported Muslim scholars and institutions, but he also gave money to Hindu temples that he thought were worthy. So while Aurangzeb's religious policies were unfair to non-Muslims, they weren't simply a case of tolerance versus intolerance. Trouble in paradise. Rebellions against Aurangzeb. Even though the Mughal Empire became the biggest it had ever been under Aurangzeb, there were also new problems that would eventually lead to its downfall. The Deccan, even though it was conquered, remained a place of unrest. The Marathas, a warrior group from the western Ghats, rebelled against the Mughals, led by a charismatic leader named Shivaji. Shivaji's clever tactics of guerrilla warfare were a constant problem for the Mughal army, and his defiance inspired others to challenge Mughal rule. The Mughal Empire, which seemed huge and unbeatable, was starting to show weakness. The cost of keeping a big army, along with the constant need to stop rebellions, was putting a big strain on the empire's treasury. The empire that Aurangzeb had inherited, an empire built on a balance of military power, a strong economy and religious tolerance, was starting to fall apart. The seeds of discontent sown by Aurangzeb's policies and the empire's overexpansion were beginning to grow. A mixed legacy, how we remember Aurangzeb today. When Aurangzeb died in 1707, the Mughal Empire slowly began to decline. He left behind a huge but unstable empire, weakened by internal conflicts and facing threats from outside. But his legacy is much more complicated than just a story of decline. Some people see him as a symbol of religious intolerance, remembering him for the jizya tax and the destruction of temples. Others see him as a devout ruler who tried to govern according to his Islamic beliefs, a man who was personally religious and good at running the government. People still argue about him today, using his image to support their own political views. Aurangzeb's reign reminds us that history is rarely simple. It's full of different perspectives, actions and reactions, and things that happen that nobody expects. To understand Aurangzeb, we need to understand the complexities of Mughal India, the challenges of ruling a vast and diverse empire, and how historical memory can be powerful and long-lasting. The sun sets on the Mughal Empire, Aurangzeb's last days. As Aurangzeb got older, the empire he had worked so hard to build started to crumble. The Deccan, which he once called a bleeding ulcer, continued to be a problem, with the Marathas refusing to give up. The empire's treasury, emptied by years of war, couldn't keep up with the rising cost of maintaining order. The emperor, once a strong and determined leader, was now an old man tired from ruling his vast empire. He spent his final years still fighting in the Deccan, hoping for a decisive victory that would cement his legacy. But victory never came, and the empire, stretched too thin and weakened by rebellions, was on the verge of collapse. Seeing both sides, trying to understand Aurangzeb. If we judge Aurangzeb only by today's standards, we'll miss the complexities of his rule and the time period he lived in. He was a man of his time, shaped by his upbringing and the political and religious beliefs of Mughal India. His actions, even the controversial ones, need to be understood in the context of his worldview and the challenges he faced. His reign wasn't just about religious intolerance and decline. He was a skilled administrator, a smart strategist, and a supporter of the arts. He made the empire bigger than ever before, made changes to the legal system, and ruled during a time of economic growth. However, his policies also alienated some groups of people, created unrest, and ultimately weakened the empire he was trying to strengthen. Learning from the past. Thinking about what it all means. Aurangzeb's legacy reminds us that history isn't about simple stories or easy judgments. It's a complicated mix of human actions and their consequences. To understand history, we need to be open to uncertainty and accept that there aren't always easy answers. Aurangzeb's reign, with its successes and failures, its moments of greatness and its mistakes, makes us think about the complexities of the past. It challenges us to look at our own biases, question what we think we know, and talk about the people who have shaped our world in a thoughtful and informed way. By learning about Aurangzeb, we can understand Mughal India better and see how much history still affects us today. It encourages us to approach the past